Welcome to the Kansas Oil Museum and Butler County Historical Society here in El Dorado, Kansas. I'm Ken Spurgeon. I'm a consultant here at the museum. This is Suzanne Walenta. She's our curator at the museum. And we're here tonight to talk to you about a program called Rural Crossroads, which is coming to our museum on December 1st.
And Rural Crossroads is a traveling exhibit throughout the state of Kansas, sponsored by the Smithsonian Institute. Kansas Oil Museum, the Butler County Historical Society is a partner site. The Kaufman Museum in Newton is the host site. The traveling exhibit is also in partnership with Humanities Kansas.
So the exhibit itself really has two parts. One is a physical part where you'll be able to come into the museum as the months progress, and we hope we get more and more open after COVID. You'll be able to come into the museum and see different elements from communities across Butler County. And then there's a digital element as well that you'll be able to come into the museum and actually look up and learn about 15 different communities across our county. Of course, when you think about Rural Crossroads, you think about the farmers and you think about the oil workers and all the laborers. But these crossroads were important because the crossroad was where people went for, church and for school and for so many other elements. And so it's kind of bringing together all the different pieces and parts of Butler County into one unique story. So today, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to take you kind of around the museum and show the museum to you a bit, and then as the weeks progress, we'll tell you about these specific communities as well. Museum, we have an area that we kind of call the Glory of the Hills, and it really kind of brings to life the pasture land, the grassland, the farming traditions and pioneer traditions of Butler County. And one of the things we always want to tell students and visitors when they come in is the first people of the Flint Hills and of Butler County, of course, were Native Americans. We had various Native American tribes that came in and out of the area in the early years. Probably by the time you get to the 18th and 19th century, it's primarily what we now know as the Plains Indians, which would have included the Wichita tribe, the Osage in particular, maybe somewhat of the Kaw. And this was home to them. It's the area that they knew well. In the 1860s, the Homestead Act provided for 160 acres to be claimed by citizens. The rules of the Homestead Act was that a family or individual would come, and if they could homestead, or sometimes they called it squatting, if they could stay for 5 years, make improvements, and they, like I said, they had to stay. They couldn't come, mark a place, and go to another one. Obviously, that was not what anybody intended. But if they could stay, then it would be theirs free and clear after 5 years. For a Union veteran, the incentive was even greater because they could take off from that 5 years every day they served in the military. Hence, Butler County was full of Union veterans of the Civil War, and certainly some Confederates, but there was a more of an incentive for Union veterans. So that started early, and of course Kansas had been a Union state and a free state. Once the pioneer era begins, as I said, farming was number one. And one of the things I always like to talk about, or we like to talk about when we're in this area of the exhibit, is just how incredible the grass is. We take it for granted, but it had so much to do with not just our farming traditions, but our cattle raising traditions, our ranch traditions that would go on to the present day. The author and educator Jim Hoy has said many times that there is no place in America like the grasslands of Kansas and the Flint Hills grasslands of Kansas. There's states, even in the Midwest, there's states where you can see 5 miles of it at tops. And in Kansas, you can see so much more, and we take it for granted. Cows could get fatter on Kansas grasslands than any other place, and so it was just tremendously advantageous to bring your cattle here. In the 1870s and the 1880s, Kansas had a senator named John James Ingalls. Ingalls was a politician and a lawyer, but he was also a poet and a writer. And one of the stories that he wrote, or poems to some extent that he wrote, was called In Praise of Bluegrass. And ironically, one of the arguments that he made was how significant and important the grasslands really were. And I always look back and read him, and I think to myself, it's a reminder to me how that really is the heart of the earth. It's the heart of the planet. One of the quotes that Ingalls used in his In Praise of Bluegrass was that flowers vanish, forests decay, harvests perish, but grass is immortal. And that really says a lot about the grasslands and the longevity and significance of the grasslands.
In this section of the museum, we talk about Butler County and the Great War. The Great War is another name for World War I. World War I happened from 1914 to 1918. U.S. involvement started in 1917. We, in this section, talk about not only the Butler County individuals who registered for the draft, we discuss how Kansas efforts often started with farming and fighting to win the war with wheat and raising crops. We also throw in a couple little fun stories about a poison plot. There was concern that there was something called plaster. It was very similar to Band-Aids that they thought had been poisoned by German spies, and there was concern about that. There was also concern that a pipeline had been sabotaged. In the case, we actually have several items. We were very fortunate to have several gentlemen who were World War I veterans. When they came back, they donated several items to the museum. So we've got clothing that they would have worn and they would have carried with them. We have gas masks that they would have used. We've got eating utensils. We also have some examples of, for those of the home front, part of their effort, you could purchase from the Red Cross sewing patterns, and you could sew sweaters and other types of things for the men on the front in the winter time. And then behind me, we have a series of helmets. Some, as you can tell, are American helmets that were worn by Butler County residents, and then a couple others were brought back from the war. We have German and French helmets. And then we also have, we're fortunate to have a gentleman, B.H. Gilmore. He was a young man from Butler County, from the El Dorado area. And he wrote 2 years worth of letters home to his family. We have all of those letters, and we've made copies and put some out for guests to read. When we think about exploration of oil in Butler County, we often don't think about Augusta. Augusta was one of the first places that oil is discovered. But by chance, the Wichita Gas Company the Wichita Natural Gas Company was doing exploratory drills around the Augusta area and happened to find oil about 7 miles south of Augusta on the Varner lease. This produced some oil, and about March of 1914, they were able to start the process of continuous oil development. However, it did not provide the oil output that Stapleton is known for. Stapleton number 1 and the El Dorado oil field is known for in 1915.
One of the neat things once you get to 1915 is it does look like, even though it's not true, like I said, you can look at maps and there's oil exploration all across Butler County, but El Dorado suddenly feels a bit like a hub of exploration, partly because of the Stapleton find and other finds in the area. When you come to the museum today, you see all kinds of oil equipment. In fact, we have arguably probably the most unique and diversified oil equipment of any museum around, certainly in the Midwest. And we have people who know quite a bit about it too, whether they're on our board or as our volunteers or still in the community, because El Dorado still and Butler County are still vibrant oil communities. But they really built the heart of the oil industry, really built this area in many ways, and it moved America. It moved America both in peacetime and in wartime.
By World War I, in 1918, oil production from Stapleton and the El Dorado oil field was 36 million barrels, or also accounted for, you could take it as 9% of U.S. oil production at the time.
So where we want to take you now is to the recreated boomtown, because when these oil finds were made in communities, very quickly towns popped up. Sometimes there was a town nearby, and if there was a town nearby, then that town just grew. But what if there wasn't a town nearby? Well, then an oil company came in and brought all the stuff, brought all the gear, and maybe brought all the homes, or at least the home plans, and suddenly an oil town or an oil boom town appeared. on our grounds here at the museum, we have several reconstructed and some original buildings from the boomtown era. On the grounds of the Kansas Oil Museum, we have several buildings from the oil boomtown era, which would be kind of 1915 to maybe 1945 if we use kind of a wider time period. During that period, because of oil exploration and all the oil finds that we have in the county and the area, many towns popped up. At one point, we've had as many as 20 or 30 towns that popped up, grew to 500, 1,000, in some cases maybe 3,000 people, and then just as quickly evaporated in the 1940s and the 1950s as things changed, as the oil discoveries were more limited. Two of the towns we talk about oftentimes at the museum is the town of Oil Hill, which is north of El Dorado, and Midian, which is west of El Dorado and between El Dorado and Towanda. Those towns are significant because they grew so fast. The oil finds were big. Both towns got to the point of schools, post offices. It looked very much like a town, but just as quickly they completely almost went away. So on the museum grounds here, we have several of our boomtown locations. You see both a house, you see a store, you see a doctor's office, a newspaper office, a landman's office, a school, all on our grounds. And so one of the things we're going to do today also is show you kind of inside some of those buildings, because those are important buildings and it's important that they be preserved for the future.
We are now inside the Redburn Grocery, part of Boomtown. This building, as well as a couple others and items in our collections, were actually donated by Howard and Barbara Redburn. So the items in this building, many are authentic to the time period. By utilizing items in collections, we are able to authentically replicate how life would have been in the 1920s and 1930s in a boomtown. Grocery stores in most communities, not just in a boomtown, could have been a family business. In the Redburn grocery store, you will find a variety of items, not only of food, but maybe hardware, clothing, oftentimes a post office. And in the back, there is a room and there's a bed and kitchen where sometimes the grocer would have lived. Since we are both the Kansas Oil Museum and the Butler County Historical Society, we are fortunate to have access to diverse collections. So not only do we have items representing the oil industry, from large tools and rotary bits and drill bits to small delicate items such as quilts and dresses and other types of textiles. So not only do you see those items outside of the oil industry and oil tool industry tools, but you also come inside and you will see a variety of items, not just in the grocery store with authentic items, but in the lease houses that we have, in Grandma Anderson's house, to Connor Cabin, to even indoors. So we try to change out our exhibits and show the items that have been donated throughout the years.
Thanks for joining us tonight as we explored the rural crossroads of Butler County. I hope you'll join us again in a couple of weeks. We're going to start to explore specific communities within our county. And in the meantime, I hope you'll like us on Facebook and start to follow our Kansas Oil Museum YouTube page. And I hope to see you again very soon.